Welcome to Eye on Africa, our daily look at the stories making headlines across the continent. Coming up, the UN accuses the Malian army and foreign armed forces of killing over 500 villagers last year in the town of Moura. A new report says rape and torture was widespread in what could amount to crimes against humanity. Fighting continues in Sudan after ceasefire talks fail, but an agreement is reached between the army and rival RSF forces to protect civilians and relief workers. The UN has called it an important first step after 4 weeks of fighting. And a new protest movement in Senegal stages its first demonstration in Dakar. The F24 movement wants to stop President Macky Sall from running for a third term in office next year. Senegal's constitution limits presidential terms to 2. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. I'm James Mulholland. First up, United Nations rights investigators have accused the Malian army of killing over 500 villagers last year alongside foreign armed forces. The new report says dozens of women were raped and many people tortured in the alleged massacre last March in the town of Moura. It describes the foreign troops as white men speaking an unfamiliar language, and it's widely suspected they were members of the Russian mercenary group Wagner. Our West Africa correspondent Sophie Lamotte tells us more.
The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights released a damning report on Friday about the Moura massacre in Mali. In late March 2022, armed men entered the town of Moura in central Mali and reportedly came under fire. Then they opened fire on the central market before rounding up the population and killing over 500 people over 4 days. At the time, Malian authorities claimed it was a military operation where roughly 200 jihadists were killed, and this recent report shows that the reality could be much different. The report shows that civilians, women and children were killed, at least 58 women and girls were raped, over 50 civilians were arrested and tortured, and dozens were killed as they were fleeing the town. Some of the victims were buried in mass graves across the city. Another notable finding is that it puts the blame on Malian forces, but also on foreign fighters. These foreign fighters are not named clearly, but the report mentions Malian official statements on Russian instructors helping in the fight against jihadists. The report also cites testimonies describing these foreign men as speaking a foreign language, an unknown language. This suggests that they were not speaking French, the official language, or English. European nations have repeatedly accused Wagner mercenaries of operating in the country, and Prisogine, the head of Wagner, said last month that his troops were on the ground.
And we have in fact had conflicting reports as to the response from the Malian authorities to the UN report. France 24 has verified with our sources who have confirmed that we do not as of yet have any reaction from the government in Bamako, and we will update you as and when we can here on France 24 in our international news bulletins. Next to Sudan, where airstrikes and artillery fire have continued in Khartoum and parts of the Darfur region after the warring parties failed to agree a truce. But late Thursday, the army and rival RSF paramilitary forces did sign a deal to protect civilians. The United Nations welcomed it as an important first step after 4 weeks of fighting that's killed at least 750 people and displaced hundreds of thousands. Bastien Renouille tells us more about the so-called Declaration of Principles.
The Sudanese army and the rapid support forces signed a commitment to respect humanitarian principles. In this document, they say that they agree that the interests and well-being of the Sudanese people are their top priority, and they affirm their commitment to ensure that civilians are protected at all times. So what does it mean exactly? Well, they're going to ensure safe passage for those who want to leave the most affected areas, such as Khartoum and the region of Darfur. They're going to let humanitarian assistance to reach these places. They're calling for the restoration of electricity and water services. In Khartoum, many do not have access to water and electricity since the beginning of the war on the 15th of April. And they're going to withdraw the security forces from hospitals. In Khartoum, again, more than 70% of hospitals have been destroyed or are currently occupied by the armed forces. But is it possible to believe the army and the rapid support forces? According to my contacts living in Khartoum, the answer to this question is no. Sudan already signed signed the Geneva Convention in 1957. Both the army and the RSF are supposed to protect civilians and follow the rule of law, and they have not done that in the beginning of the war on the 15th of April. So why would they respect a new agreement? Most of my contacts in Khartoum tell me that the only thing they're expecting now is a ceasefire, but this ceasefire is yet to come. The army and the rapid support forces could not agree on it. They just agreed that they will meet during the next days, during the next weeks to find solutions. But this ceasefire is getting more and more urgent as the situation is getting worse every day in Sudan as the war continues.
Bastien Renouy in Nairobi there. Now, a new protest movement in Senegal has staged its first demonstration in Dakar. The F24 movement brings together opposition parties and civil society groups who want to stop President Macky Sall from running for a third term in office. Under Senegal's constitution, a president is limited to 2 terms. Take a listen.
The protesters gathered here in central Dakar have one principal aim: to stop Macky Sall running for a third presidential term. Among them are supporters of the Senegalese opposition leader, Ousmane Sonko.
We are going to fight Macky Sall right until the end. We are going to fight him. He must keep his hands off Sonko.
In 2011, all the Senegalese people gathered here to defend the principles of liberty and democracy. Macky Sall, who is now president, was among us.
This new protest movement, known as F24, is composed of more than 150 political and civil society organizations. They believe Macky Sall's government is too authoritarian.
As well as fighting against the third term, we also want to reinstate elements of the electoral code that were changed by Macky Sall to sideline political opponents. We want these elements reinstated.
Macky Sall hasn't yet officially declared his candidacy for the 2024 election.
We cannot accept that the Senegalese people of any rank can decide who can or cannot be a candidate. It is the role of the Constitutional Council to validate candidacies in accordance with the law.
F24 have already announced another protest for next week.
Next up, Tunisians on the island of Djerba are mourning after the attack at the Riba synagogue that killed 5 people this week. Jewish and Muslim members of the community have come together to offer support and to send out a message of reassurance. This ahead of the peak tourist season, which is approaching. Some 30,000 of Djerba's 160,000 residents depend on the sector. Our correspondents Fadil Aliriza and Lilia Blaise sent us this report.
In the city of Souk in Djerba, most jewelers are Jewish Tunisians. Ariel is still in mourning over the attack, but has gone back to work. He talks with Hatem, a Muslim shopkeeper. Both depend on selling to tourists and returning diaspora.
I own the shop. It's been about 30 years, and it's been relatively successful. But with this attack, we hope that it won't dissuade tourists, because what happened is really shocking.
I live just next to the Hara neighborhood, where Ariel and Jewish Tunisians live. I live just 500 meters away, and we always lived here without any problems. The attack is a strike against tourism, because Djerba essentially lives off of it.
Since 2022, tourism in Djerba had begun to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, with the number of visitors more than doubling. Most of these are Tunisians and French. This year, with the continuing economic crisis, the return of tourism is seen as a lifeline. But for how long?
So yes, this news does impact us. We were slightly concerned, but very quickly we were reassured. In any case, we booked for 15 days. So we'll return to Djerba in August.
Hotels are also trying to reassure people, still offering their tourism packages.
It is important to maintain activity no matter what. We still employ a few thousand people on the island of Djerba. There are many people who come to work on the island, and the economic activities depend on it.
Today, it's still early to assess the impact of the attack on the tourism season, but on the island, security forces who did not want to be filmed remained on high alert.
Finally, voters in Mauritania head to the polls this Saturday for legislative and local elections. 25 parties are vying for the backing of some 1.8 million voters, with the rising cost of living at the top of their concerns. The party of President Mohamed Ould Ghazouani is widely favoured to win most constituencies, and, as our correspondent Sam Bradpiece tells us, it could be a key indicator ahead of next year's presidential election.
The results of upcoming legislative and local elections in Mauritania feel like somewhat of a foregone conclusion. Not since the advent of multi-party democracy in the country in 1991 has a sitting president failed to command an overwhelming majority in the country's legislature. One of the main opposition parties, led by a prominent anti-slavery activist, has been banned from taking part in these elections, and it's only the presidential party which is fielding candidates in every single seat in the country. Mauritania has one of the highest levels of modern-day slavery anywhere in the world, and that's not its only issue. It also currently faces inflation of around 10%, but both of these factors are unlikely to hurt the chances of the president. A strong result could embolden him to stand for a second term at next year's presidential polls.
And that's it for this edition of Eye on Africa. As ever, plenty more news on our website, france24.com, and more news coming up right here at the top of the hour with the international news. Stay tuned.